This is Dr. Janice Mladonicky. Jan is a researcher at the Raptor Center at the University of Minnesota, where much of her work focuses on animal health at the human and environmental interfaces. She received her DVM at the College of Veterinary Medicine and Biomedical Sciences at Colorado State University and a master's in public health from the Colorado School of Public Health. She has completed a residency at the University of Minnesota in veterinary public health and preventive medicine. With a passion for wildlife conservation, Jan is interested in understanding disease dynamics afflicting our ecosystems and how to best protect humans and animals that share it. Jan will speak to us about highly pathogenic avian influenza in 2022. Thank you, Jan.
Thanks for having me. I'm very excited to be here today. All right, so with this talk, I will provide a brief overview of influenza viruses, describe our current outbreak situation, discuss ways the virus spreads among birds, and offer some tips on how to keep ourselves and the birds healthy. So don't be scared. There are 4 types of influenza viruses, A through D. A and B get the most attention as they are the only virus types that cause seasonal epidemics in people every winter. Type C is uncommon and type D primarily affects cattle. Influenza A viruses are further divided into subtypes based on the combinations of 2 proteins that sit atop the virus surface. These 2 proteins are named hemagglutinin, the blue pin-looking things in this image, and have 18 possible subtypes, 1 through 18, and neuraminidase, the red-looking pins here, which have 11 or 1 to 11 possible subtypes, making a lot of possible combinations or subtypes possible. So as an example of this nomenclature, during our human flu season this year, the majority of human flu strains were H3N2, and the predominant influenza strain involved in our bird outbreak right now is H5N1. Real quickly, I'll mention the influenza viruses we commonly hear about in animals. These are all type A viruses, with the exception that human influenza can be both type A and B. Of course, we have human and seasonal influenza, also known as flu season, which causes the seasonal epidemics every winter in the United States. Swine influenza affects pigs and follows a seasonal pattern just like human influenza. Human infections are rare, and when they do occur, they're mostly seen in workers in the swine industry. For the most part, influenza viruses stick to their originating species. However, as we saw in 2009 during the human swine flu pandemic, that a viral jump from one species, swine, to another, humans, does occur. Canine influenza or dog flu is highly contagious among dogs, but is currently understood to pose a low threat to people. And then we have avian influenza, or bird flu, the focus of the rest of this talk. Avian influenza can affect all types of birds at varying levels. Human infections with avian influenza are rare, with most infections occurring following close, prolonged, unprotected contact with infected birds or their environments. In the event a human infection does occur, the infection usually does not result in human to human spread, though it can occur. Avian influenza is found routinely in wild aquatic birds. This includes waterfowl, the dabbling ducks, geese, swans, gulls, and terns, and shorebirds such as storks, plovers, and sandpipers. These birds are considered natural reservoirs, harboring virus in their intestines and respiratory tract, but they usually don't show any signs of disease. For the most part, they are generally unaffected by these infections. The story changes a bit when we talk about chickens and poultry, including turkeys and domesticated ducks. All avian influenza viruses are further classified by their pathogenicity, or ability to cause severe disease, and they fall within 2 categories: low pathogenic avian influenza, or LPAI, and highly pathogenic avian influenza, or HPAI. Avian influenza viruses, especially those highly pathogenic, cause severe disease in this group and can kill up to 90 to 100% of a poultry flock. Of note, these categories have no correlation with their disease severity in humans, but are based instead on their ability to cause severe illness in chickens. Infected poultry may be depressed, have decreased egg production, have nasal or eye discharge, may cough, have unusual presentations with their neck in a twisted fashion, and or have trouble standing, among other signs. According to a USDA official, the indication something was amiss in one of the commercial farms during this current outbreak was the birds just simply stopped drinking water. The subtypes with the most potential to be highly pathogenic are H5 and H7. So when they are picked up on routine wildlife and domestic poultry surveillance, they get a lot of notice. Highly pathogenic avian influenza is a big deal to animal agriculture. As I mentioned before, highly pathogenic avian influenza can kill an entire flock. The mortality rate is near 100%. Once the virus has entered a facility, it's nearly impossible to contain. Viral spread is rapid and can be transferred quickly between multiple facilities. The impacts are not limited to the United States, and consequences are far-reaching. With HPAI identified in poultry flocks, this must be reported to the OIE, or the World Organization for Animal Health, with having potential trade implications. Because of the rapid spread of virus, the high mortality rates and trade implications, once an infected bird is identified in a flock, the entire flock is culled. Millions of birds across 17 states have already been culled since the outbreak began in North America in December. And then, of course, there's the potential for humans to become infected with this virus. And there was always a concern that it could go through feature mutations, leading to easier bird-to-human transmission. As in poultry, HPAI is devastating in raptors. Raptors are highly susceptible to infection and disease, and it is generally fatal. Death may be rapid within days without any noticeable clinical signs or symptoms. If signs of disease are detected, they are similar to those seen in poultry. While fatalities aren't as commonly seen as in poultry and raptors, corvids, including ravens, jays, magpies, and other scavenging birds such as gulls and crows, may be at a higher risk for disease as they scavenge on infected waterfowl. Going back to the raptors for a minute, this image was taken at the Raptor Center at the University of Minnesota. This eagle here is actually afflicted with the toxic level of lead in its body. With lead in eagles, the defining feature, fun fact, is the green color seen on the mute. But this is also a common presentation of HPAI observed in eagles, with their neck bent downward, whose beak to chest. Because HPAI and lead intoxications have very similar presentations, this is posing a real challenge right now at the Raptor Center, as HPAI is very contagious and lead is not. Okay, so what about songbirds and pigeons? So while any bird can become infected with HPAI, these groups seem to not be as impacted as waterfowl, shorebirds, raptors, and poultry. Some experimental studies have shown pigeons can become infected when given an extremely high dose of virus, but overall, we are not seeing pigeons as a high risk for disease. We are just not seeing mortalities right now in these groups. So how do we know what avian influenza strains are circulating among wildlife? I mentioned surveillance for H5 and H7 strains on a previous slide. Dabbling ducks on routine are sampled along watersheds among the 4 major North American flyways. Both live and hunter-harvested wild birds are tested. Since the initial detection of HPAI strain in December in the Atlantic flyway, surveillance has since been expanded. This initial detection consisted of a small backyard flock and 2 black-backed gulls in Newfoundland and Labrador, Canada. The last time HPAI was detected in wild birds was in 2015. This is a current map published by the United States Geological Survey. It was updated on March 24th, and it shows the cases of the distribution of HPAI detections in North America. As I mentioned, the first detection in US wildlife occurred on January 14 in a hunter-harvested American widgeon in South Carolina. The red dots are commercial poultry farms, the yellow dots are backyard flocks, and the green dots are wild birds. You can see HPAI has been detected in the central and eastern US, reaching now across 3 of the flyways, the Atlantic, the Mississippi, and the Central. No infections have yet been documented in Minnesota. Both the US Geological Survey, seen on the previous map, and the USDA keep their websites updated with the HPAI detections in poultry flocks and wild birds. On the USDA website, you can track the location, the count of, and the types of birds with detections in the United States. As of last night, there were 59 entries for commercial and backyard flocks and 472 entries for wild bird detections. The largest flock that was affected this past week was a commercial broiler chickens with 570,000 birds in Butler, Nebraska. The largest so far was reported March 17 in an Iowa commercial flock where 5.3 million layer chickens were destroyed. Here are some of the detections in wild birds since the onset of the outbreak, with the states are in parentheses. I just selected a few, but you can see them all if you go to the USDA website. HPAI has since been found in 12 bald eagles. Closer to home here in Minnesota, so far, HPAI was found in a herring gull in Ohio, a snow goose in North and South Dakota, and a Canada geese in Illinois, South Dakota, and Nebraska. In Iowa, which I didn't list on this slide, are 20 birds, all of the same type of goose, except for one mallard with HPAI. Again, no cases have been detected yet in Minnesota. Also, Wisconsin and Michigan have not had any cases documented as of yet. So I talked about the virus. I've talked about the impacts of HPAI in the agriculture industry, and I've talked about the current outbreak situation and how you can stay updated. Now I'll briefly mention how this virus is spread between birds, as knowing this may help us avoid spreading the virus to these creatures we love. As mentioned, avian influenza A viruses are very contagious among birds. Birds can become exposed to the virus directly from other birds or indirectly from a virally contaminated environment. Because avian influenza viruses may be in the intestines and respiratory tract of infected birds, they can shed the virus in their feces, saliva, and nasal secretions. Other birds can become infected by direct contact with these secretions of infected birds. Raptors and other scavenging birds generally become infected with HPAI by consuming a bird that has the virus. The virus can survive in bird carcasses for several days at ambient temperatures and several weeks when kept at temperatures equal to refrigeration. When we talk about indirect ways of spreading the virus, we refer to a contaminated environment or other objects being a source for the virus. Fecal-oral transmission is the principal mode of transmission among birds, with the bird ingesting feces contaminated food or water. Objects referred to as fomites can be feathers, shoes, clothing, or other equipment. Birds can then become infected indirectly through contact with these objects. Unfortunately, avian influenza viruses can survive weeks to months in aquatic environments and feces and can survive indefinitely in frozen material. So how can we help avoid spreading the virus when outdoors for recreational activities or waterfowl are present? So make sure you're not a fomite. The first step is really, though, to avoid contact with birds or their materials. Observe birds and other wildlife only from a distance. Avoid touching surfaces that may have become contaminated with avian feces, mucus, or saliva. Avoid touching the water that's near them. If for some reason you handle birds, such as in hunting or other work, wear gloves. Of course, it may not be possible to avoid bird droppings when in waterfowl habitat. Cleaning shoes after your activity or work can help prevent spreading the virus if present to other areas. For those who work with wildlife in rehabilitation settings, a dedicated pair of shoes should be reserved only for work, a pair that you don't wear when outdoors. Clothes should be clean and not worn when around outside wildlife. So clean your clothes. Also be mindful of all equipment or other things that you set down while outdoors. Clean and disinfect all equipment that may have been contaminated when placed on the ground when outdoors in this waterfowl habitat. And also keep yourself healthy by avoiding touching your eyes, your nose, and your mouth when you're outdoors. Washing hands with soap and water is the simplest and one of the best ways to prevent infections of all kinds. Clothing that may have been in contact with birds or other materials should be washed with detergent and placed in the dryer on a very hot setting. So what else can you do while you're outdoors? The state is encouraging anyone that sees sick or dead birds to make a report. Numbers to call are online on the Minnesota Board of Animal Health's website. Specifically, if you see sick or dead wild waterfowl or other birds in a group of 5 or more, call the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources. Leave the birds alone until otherwise instructed. If local authorities tell you to throw away the bird's body, remember, don't touch it with your bare hands. Use gloves or a plastic bag turned inside out to place the body in a garbage bag, which then can be thrown away in your regular trash. Then wash your hands with soap and water. For those of you who have backyard flocks, sick or dead poultry should also be reported to the USDA or the Minnesota Poultry Testing Laboratory. Additionally, anyone with chickens, I would encourage you to check out the USDA's website for resources related to their Defend the Flock campaign. There's a wealth of biosecurity information that's specific to backyard poultry. And lastly, the Raptor Center is helping to support the USDA's HPI surveillance program by testing raptors. If you find a sick or deceased raptor, give the Raptor Center a call for further instruction. There are many resources available to help keep you updated and informed on the situation, in addition to providing recommendations for best biosecurity practices for all those who work with and enjoy wildlife. The USDA, the US Geological Survey, the CDC, and the Minnesota Board of Animal Health are all great resources and have great websites. If you are interested in information specific to avian rehabilitation, a recorded webinar is provided on the Raptor Center's website. So it's difficult to predict how long this current HPAI outbreak will last. The last outbreak in 2005 wrapped up by June. This outbreak may follow a similar course, or it may go on longer. Influenza viruses have been around a long time, and we know a lot about it and how to keep humans and animals safe. However, as we enter year 3 of a pandemic that seemed to take the world by surprise, we know that we must be kept on our toes. Keep yourself updated and keep practicing all those great public health precautions to do your part to keep yourself and the birds healthy.
Jen, you scared us all to death.
Oh no, don't be scared.
I'm kind of teasing you, but not exactly. Is there any sort of vaccination possibilities or anything other than like culling millions of birds that can be done?
And when you're referring to the commercial poultry industry?
Right.
Yeah. The primary means of containing the virus is culling.
Okay.
Yeah.
Very scary. This is fascinating. Thank you so much for your talk. We're going to open it up for a few minutes for questions for Dr. Mladonicky, for Kristen Hall, and for Bill Teff. Does anyone have any questions? I know, Kristen, you answered a lot of yours via the chat. But if there are any other questions, now is the time. Otherwise, a huge, huge thank you to our panel of speakers. You guys, each and every one of you have been incredible. We know how much time it takes, how much time and effort it takes to put together your presentations, and we just appreciate it so much. We also appreciate our audience. Thank you so much for calling in. Thank you for your patience and your flexibility today. A couple very quick announcements. First, be sure to check out the MOU and Carpenter Nature Center's field trips. There's information for those things online and in the chat. Please check out our respective websites. We'd love to have those of you who aren't members become members. And we'd also love donations for any of you who are so inclined. And finally, we are recording this presentation and it should be posted soon to the MOU YouTube site. And is there a site for Carpenter at this point?
It'll be on the MOU site and we'll link from Carpenter's website and Facebook page as well.
So thank you so much, everybody. Truly appreciate your involvement today.
And thanks again to our amazing, amazing presenters. This is all volunteer effort and we are just so grateful for all the time you put into this.
See you next year.
And it looks like we have a few questions on the screen.
Yeah. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I'll check for the questions. Are you able to see on yours?
Yeah.
All right, here we go. So if I scroll down, I don't know if you're able to see them. There was one about, Janice, are you able to see the posts? It says something about, should we avoid buying eggs from backyard chicken ranchers?
Let me think about how to answer that question. These aren't in the commercial poultry. I'm assuming these aren't the commercial eggs that you're talking about. These are the backyard poultry.
Right.
I believe that would be at your own discretion. We do know that cooking eggs to an internal temperature of 165 degrees does kill the virus.
Awesome.
And it looks like we have a question from Roger Everhart, whether it's being monitored in songbirds, and he's a bander, and what should I be aware of, if anything, beyond what you've already spoken to?
Yeah, so if you see any sick songbirds, if you see a group of 5 or more that are dead, call the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources, and they will give you further instructions on what to do.
And then I didn't see that this was answered. Are they even considering vaccination for commercial and backyard birds in order to cut down on the spread of disease?
Yeah, I'm not too familiar if they're entertaining vaccination at this time. I know that once it's detected, the vaccination isn't effective. The vaccination is more of a preventive strategy, but once it's already detected, they want to contain the virus as much as possible. And so unfortunately that results in culling the flock.
And I think the only other one I heard come up, and jump in anyone if I missed it, was we had a avid waterfowl birder ask, what sort of personal health risks are there for humans if they catch the disease? Is it, lethal? We should be really freaked out for our own health, or is it all relatively manageable?
It is a concern. And so that's why the recommendation is, whenever you're with wildlife or other birds, to protect yourself as much as possible. Avoid touching your eyes, touching your mouth, wear proper protective gear. And then about 10 days after your exposure, within that time frame, monitor your health for symptoms similar to the flu. And if you notice any flu-like symptoms, to contact your health department and mention that you have had contact with birds. And so most of the time, the infections that do occur are self-resolving, but there's always a potential for more severe disease. So it's important to protect yourself, monitor your health, give the health department or your medical provider a heads up that you did have an exposure to a bird and are coming down with these symptoms, and just
be well.
yeah, just like with COVID, right? The CDC has a great wealth of information on this topic, and they have some specific signs on what to watch out for. Another thing that's recommended is getting your seasonal flu vaccine. While it won't protect you against avian influenza, it's only reserved for human influenza strains. It will protect you from getting a human and avian flu strain at the same time.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And thank you, everybody. See you next year.